from Chelek Tezvav, Parshas Toldos. In the schus of a refuah shlema kreva for Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak ben Simachasya. Al hapasuk vayhi kizakein Yitzchak v'techiena einov meira'os. On the pasuk that tells us that Yitzchak grew older and his eyes were weakened and it was difficult for him to see. Hevi Rashi shloisha perushim bebir sibas v'techiena. Rashi brings three reasons for why his sight became compromised. First reason is that it was from the smoke of those, a veiled reference to Esav's wives, that used to bring avodah zarah, used to bring offerings, seems incense offerings to avodah zarah. Davar acher, another reason, when Yitzchak was bound on top of the Mizbeach, and his father wanted to slaughter him. In that moment, the heavens opened, the Ra'u Malachi Hasharis, and the ministering angels saw V'hayubaychim v'yardu d'meiseim v'naflu al einav, and they cried, and their tears came down and fell upon Yitzchak's eyes, and lefichach kohu einav, and so his eyesight was dimmed because of the tears of the angels. Davar acher, yet one more reason, kedei sheyitel Yaakov es habrachos, in order that Yaakov should be able to get the brachos, he should be able to more correctly take the brachos. The einai move on. It's not understood. And the Rebbe is going to ask three questions here. Aleph. Because of gufa. It would seem, simply speaking, that Rashi does not seem to have to give us reasons, because the reason is found in the pasuk. Betchilas pasuk, at the beginning of the pasuk, it says, "Vayhi kizakein Yitzchak," and it was when Yitzchak grew older. So simply speaking, as a result of growing older, his eyesight was weakened. And like it says about Yaakov, that Yaakov Avinu's eyes became more difficult to carry, meaning his eyesight was compromised because of his older age. And as we see, practically speaking, that with age, eyesight becomes weakened, and a host of other things. So since it would seem that the pasuk itself provides the reason for why his eyesight became weakened, why does Rashi have to find other reasons? It's right there. It's in the pasuk. It's clear and obvious and self-understood. Beis. Second question. Rashi This is one of the axiomatic rules that the Rebbe has given us in his science of analyzing Rashi, that when Rashi brings two or more reasons or explanations, that it is always because each one of them has some kind of deficit that the others don't have. And the order in which he provides the various reasons is also specific and b'diuk, exact. The second explanation has a greater deficit than the first. And the third, relatively speaking to the second, has a more profound, let's just say, weakness or shortcoming. Bitzarech lahavin. And so we have to understand. Mahu hakoshi b'chol echad b'shloishes hapirushim shebepirish Rashi didan. So we have to understand what is the difficulty, what is the deficit, what is the drawback in each one of the three reasons that Rashi gives. Ubemeh kosha hapirish hasheni yosem and hapirish harishain, hapirish hashlishi yosem mishnei kaidlav. And in which way is the second less perfect than the first, and the third even less perfect than the two that preceded? That was question 2. 3. Kvar nisbar ba'avar kama pa'amim. It has already been explained in the past a number of times. Shebemakim shehebi Rashi shloisha perushim, that where Rashi brings 3 explanations, hine milvad hakoshi hamiyuchad b'chol echad me'apirushim b'fnei atzmai. This means that in addition to the specific difficulty or deficit that is found in each one of them, which is reconciled or addressed in the other 2 explanations, it is also true that the 2 remaining share a difficulty or a deficit that the third one does not. And therefore, there's a need for that third explanation. Because with that third explanation, the problem doesn't exist. And the Rebbe just solidifies this and says in the parentheses, because if we were to say, or if we were to suppose that through the agency of 2 of the explanation, all of the questions are answered, all of the deficits are taken care of, then Rashi would not need to provide a third perush. So this means that if there are 3 perushim, there's an absolute need for each one of those, and each 2 share a shortcoming that the third does not. The imkain, and if so, and so therefore the Rebbe says we have to find what is the shared problem in each 2 that the third one does not share, and to find how what each 2 of the explanation share that is reconciled by the third. Okay, so to review, why is there a Rashi altogether? It would seem that the pasuk provides us with a very, very good practical reason. He got older, his eyesight was dimmed. Then the Rebbe says that wherever Rashi brings more than one explanation, that there's a very, very good reason for it, and the order in which the various explanations are lined up, in which they're brought, is very, very specific and exact. And we have to understand, why does Rashi feel compelled? Rashi never set out to be a compendium of all possible explanations and things that are written in every medrash, every Gemara, etc., to explain a question. Where he brings more than one explanation, it's because he feels that he must. And specifically when there are 3, it means that every 2 share a shortcoming that the third one does not. And so the Rebbe is going to show us how that is the case in the Rashi understudy today. Se'iv Beis. Hatam sheli rotze Rashi lefarish k'vish efshar lemer pashto shatam batachyenuhu kizokein Yitzchak. First, let's address why it is that Rashi demurs from using what seems to be the practical and the obvious answer, that his eyesight was dim because Yitzchak got older. So the Rebbe explains, B'parsha HaKedemus, Nemar Vayivorech Elokim es Yitzchak. In the previous parsha, it says that Hashem blessed Yitzchak, Uperish Rashi Sham. And Rashi explains over there, Nisyare Avraham Levarech es Yitzchak. Avraham was afraid to bless Yitzchak. Amar Yavoi Bal HaBracha is B'Yivorechu, Ubal Kadosh Baruch Hu Ubirchai. Avram said, let the Baal HaBrachas, let Hashem himself come and bless Yitzchak, and that's what Hashem did. Va'ayla hakushya. And so the question arises, how is it possible? After we understand that it was Hashem himself who blessed Yitzchak, how is it possible that Yitzchak should arrive at a place where his eyesight is dimmed, where something should be less than perfect? And specifically, eyesight, that losing eyesight causes a person to have pain and troubles and travail. So much so that Rashi says that a blind person is like he's dead. And it's a simple thing. That after Hashem, who is the source of all blessing, bless Yitzchak, Ziknasai befrat bismana mahim she 123 shanim lehayu gil mufla kolkach. So how is it possible that his age, and especially in those days, living 123 years was not such a advanced age? So how is it possible that his ziknasa, his old age, should impact him? Because it shouldn't have been the case that after Hashem blessed him, that he should be harmed in such a profound way that he should be referred to kemes, as a dead person, for the duration of 57 years. Ubefrat. And especially, we did not find this said of anybody who has been mentioned thus far. 123 shana. Even though many lived much longer than 123 years, and we did not see mentioned that their eyesight was impacted. Therefore, Rashi feels compelled to bring other reasons for why his eyesight dimmed. This means that most generally and specifically, that because Yitzchak was blessed by Hashem, if there wouldn't have been other reasons that would be kind of mixed into this equation, then indeed, like it says about Moshe, his eyesight would not have been dimmed. But in this case, there were other reasons that got mixed in, and it is those other things that caused his eyesight to be dimmed. Gimel. So that answered the first question of why there's a Rashi at all, when it should just be self-understood from the pasuk. Gimel. Kivan shebelimit pasuk v'tachiyana einav mereis oila tekef hakushya ech yitachen sheyitzchak shenizbarach alidei Baruch Hu atzmai laka b'kiyas einayim. Because as soon as you read this pasuk, immediately there is this question that kind of smacks you in the face. How is it possible that Yitzchak, who was blessed by Hashem, should be stricken with dimness of vision? Canal, as was said above. So the Rebbe says it is logical to conclude that the answer is also embedded in the pasuk, just like the question is, because it tells you that he got older and his eyesight was dimmed, but we learned that he was blessed by Hashem, and therefore that should not have been the case. And as the Rebbe mentions, people lived more years than he did, previously mentioned, and we don't see the same thing by them. So the Rebbe says, just like the question is so obvious in the pasuk, the answer should be. Nemar behemshach lemesupar bepasuk hakodim al nashei Esav. We find in the pasuk, in the continuum to what it says earlier about the wives of Esav, shahayu moiras ruach Yitzchak Rivka, that they were a cause of consternation and bitterness to Yitzchak and Rivka. Shahayu Avdas Avodah Zarah, because they served Avodah Zarah. So obviously, Esav's parents were very upset. Mistaber. So therefore, it's logical. Therefore, it's logical to assume that in the juxtaposition of these psukim, the way they're put one next to the other, is alluded to the reason for the dimming of the eyes. And therefore, Rashi brings explanation that his eyes being dimmed was because of the smoke that came from the offerings, the incense offerings that they were offering to Avodah Zarah. Tekef, and Rashi brings this immediately, Betchilas Dvar Perish Ha'ikri. He brings this at the very beginning of his parish as the main parish. Shekem Perish Them Merumas Biksuvim Gufa. Why? Because this explanation is alluded to in the psukim themselves. And Rashi is all about Pshuta Shel Mikra. Masha Inkin, in contradistinction, Lefisha Shnei Perushim Acherim Sibas Batachiana Eina Mirumezes Bepashtus Haksuvim. While the other two explanations that he brings are not alluded to in the plain pasuk or psukim. Dalet. Me'idach, but on the other hand, the Perish Harishan Yeshnei Kishoyim. But in the first explanation, there are two problems. There are two deficits. There are two difficulties. Aleph, move on. It's clear, it's understood that Esav's wives didn't live in the same house with Yitzchak. Ella bedira shmishalahen, but they lived in their own quarters. V'chein move on, and it's also understood Sha'asu es ma'asehen halalu shahayu evdes avodah zarah u'ma'ashna yisvchulu bedira o b'shushalahen. And it's also self-understood that they offer these offerings in their own quarters. V'kivan shekach, and so if so, tzas doichik lomar sha'ashna shel elu bedirasan heizik liyitzchak bebeisai. You're a little bit hard pressed to say that the offerings that they brought in their quarters hurt Yitzchak's eyes as he lives in his own house. That's one problem. And if it does hurt the eyes of the neighbors next door, let's say even that they lived so close, why did it hurt Yitzchak's eyes and not Rivka's eyes? And because of these two difficulties, the parish Harishan in the first parish that Rashi brings, and Rashi brings that as the first parish because it's alluded to in the Pshat, but because it has two of these problems, therefore Rashi must resort to provide the next two perushim. Hey. And now the Rebbe says, I'm going to delineate the specific difficulty in the remaining commentaries, in the remaining explanations. Aleph. The first being, the second parish that Rashi brings is that this happened during the Akedah, that when the angel saw how Avram Avinu is ready to slaughter his son, they cried, and the tears fell into Yitzchak's eyes and dimmed his vision. And the third explanation is Kadesh Yitol Yaakov es habrachos, that Yaakov should be able to take the brachos. So the Rebbe says, I'm going to explain what the problem is with each one of these. Milvad hakoshi hameshutav l'shneihem, separate and apart from the problem that they both share, which the Rebbe will address later. She'ein kol remez l'dvarim b'kasov. And the Rebbe says, I've already addressed. Sorry. The Rebbe says, I've already addressed what their sheer problem is, and that is that they're not alluded to in the pasuk. Now I'm going to address the specific problems, and then later the Rebbe will do this with every set of two. The Pirish Hasheni Kasha. So the difficulty in the second explanation is as follows. Teichen HaPirish. The content of this explanation that Niftuchu Hashemayim v'ro Malachi Asharis v'hayu beichim v'yordu d'maseyim leficha kahu einav, that the heavens were opened, that the ministering angels saw, they started to cry, their tears came down, and they fell into Yitzchak's eyes, and therefore his eyesight was dimmed. Hu inin shel drash. This is a medrash. Ulegamri lo yal pi pshuta shel mikra, and darka shel Rashi b'pirush shel HaTorah. It's not at all al pi pshat, which is the modality of Rashi in his perush on Torah. In many places, the Rebbe distinguishes between Rashi's commentary on the Torah and Rashi's commentary on the Gemara. The Rebbe underscores here that this explanation is al pi drash, and it's not in conformity with Rashi's general approach in Torah. The third explanation, however, provides a greater wonder, so a bigger problem than this one. How is it possible? How is it possible that Hashem should dim the eyesight of Yitzchak? And for so many years, Rak Kedesha Mishu Acher Yaakov Yikabel Alidei Sabrachas, only so that somebody else, in this case being Yaakov, should receive the brachas. In other words, smite Yitzchak with such a profound problem, only to benefit somebody else. Ubefrat, and especially Sharbei Drachim L'Makan. We're taught over and over that Hashem can accomplish the same thing through infinite ways. Surely there were other ways that Hashem could have arranged it that Yaakov should receive the brachas. And because this is a bigger question, a bigger problem than the deficit in the second perush, which is that it's only a medrash and it's not al pi pshat. Shari grimas yisurim behefach hatoiv la'adam avor toiva zulase niris kehefach hayesher, because causing pain and suffering to one person in order to benefit a second person appears to be opposite of justice. Something that we cannot, God forbid, ever attribute to Hashem. That's why Rashi places this third last, in the third place, third position. Yes, Sarah.
Question. To say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu never does that, that something happens to somebody to teach somebody for other people, I've learned in the past that it has happened. Unfortunately, very young babies pass away sometimes for the parents and not for the baby. The baby itself was pure and holy neshama. Why could a baby die so young? Something to teach parents. And tzaddikim suffering. It says that tzaddikim who suffer, sometimes it's because they're suffering for the rest of the generation. You know, why do bad things happen to good people? One of the reasons that tzaddikim have it bad is because they're teaching the generation something. So I don't know, I guess that maybe the Rebbe is trying to find something very, very positive here, but I have learned in the past that Hashem does do some things to teach other people.
So I think what we have to remember is to zoom out and see the complexity of what we're talking about, okay? And even if and when sometimes it seems like something is happening and we even use that explanation, but the Rebbe says, but that's not the whole picture. There is never even an iota of injustice. And to say that one person should suffer only because of another, we cannot say that. So somebody brought out Dina Bas Leah. So Rashi says it's because Yaakov withheld her, therefore, but look what the Rebbe does in that iconic sikha of Dina Bas Leah. He explained to us that Dina had kaiches that had to be released. So in other words, we have to constantly, you know what? Let's remember Rashi's words. Rashi says, "Kipatesh yipoite sela." If you were to take an anvil and smash a stone, there would be so many pieces, so many shards that would fall all over the place. That seemed to be like, how can we ever put this back together again? But they all came from the same stone. So it's like the old thing that they say in Chassidus, depends in what context you're speaking. This is true, this is true, this is true, this is true. We lack the ability most often to be able to put all the pieces that belong to one stone together perfectly. But that's why the Rebbe is here to teach us, among so many other reasons. So Rebbe is saying that to say that it was only for this reason. Like there are mefarshim that say that Aaron suffered for his role in Cheta Egel, even though we know that he did this al Mesiras Nefesh, he was ready to lay down himself on the line to save Bnei Yisrael, because Chalil, if they would have done something to him, there would have been no recourse and so on and so forth. But there are mefarshim that indict him for his passive role and say, therefore, that he lost his sons. But we know that his sons left this world for their own reasons. So like it's a multi-gazillion piece puzzle. And we can't, forget that for even one moment. Vav, ka'amor le'il, as stated above, v'chol echad mishleishes hapirushim yesh ma'ila al shnei hapirushim ha'acherim. Rebbe says, and let us also remember that in this set of three, each set of two has a strength or a superlative quality that the others don't. U'b'signoin acher, or to say differently, b'chol shnei pirushim yesh koishi oidoicha kal mishutav she'ena kiyem b'pirush hashlishi. That each set of two has a difficulty, or you're a little bit hard pressed, and that is shared by these two, but the third one does not suffer from the same deficiency. So what's the main feature in the first al pnei shnei hacherim relative to the other two? Ka'amor le'il, as I said earlier, b'kach sheperish zeh bilvad mirumas b'kosov. Because only the first is alluded to in the Pshuta Shel Mikra. So that is the superlative quality that the first one has that the other two don't. And as the Rebbe said above, that's why Rashi puts it first. Umailas haperish hasheni leumas harishon v'hashlishihi. Now the Rebbe is going to give us the salient quality of the second vis-a-vis the first and the third. So what does the second have that the first and the third are missing? So the Rebbe says, Lefi kol pirushim, in accordance with all of the explanations, Hasiba shagorma liyitzchak l'seises abracha Yaakov hi achein batechiyena. No matter how you cut it, the reason that Yitzchak ended up giving Yaakov the bracha is because his eyes were dimmed. Ella, however, shalafi aperish harishim ashlishi bava techiyena al yidei inishal gnus b'chisaren. But if you look at the first explanation or the third explanation, his blindness or the dimness of eyesight is a result, is an outgrowth of something negative. If you're looking at the first, it's because of the smoke that came from the offerings to Avodah Zarah of his daughters-in-law. And if you're looking at the third explanation, it's because Yitzchak was drawn to bless Esav. Umemela nimtza, and so you're left with the result she'inishal gnus b'chisaron hevi dafka lebrachos. So it seems like Yaakov's blessings emerge from something negative, from something less than perfect, from a chesaron, from a deficit. Masha Enkain, but in contradistinction, if you have Perish Hasheni, but if you look at the second explanation, Hare Adraba, not only does it not come from a place of weakness or deficit, but on the contrary, Vatechyena ba b'shel ma'alasei shel Yitzchak b'glal ha'akeda. The dimness of his eyes comes because of his superlative quality and his level of Yitzchak. It's because of that Akeda. It's because of what happened at that Akeda. And now the Rebbe says, "Begam beperish hashlishi matzinu maila al shnei harishonim." And in the third explanation, we find a superlative quality that is lacking in the first two. Lefi shnei haperushim harishonim. If you're looking at the first two explanations, Nimta shahameura batechyena einav meir ois hayashanim rabbis lefnei hazman sheboy zaken Yitzchak. It seems that the events that led to his compromised eyesight happened years before he became older. Because if it's about Esav's wives, Esav gets married many years before Yitzchak passes. If it's because of the Akeda, he was only 37. He was only 100 years old when Esav married his wives. We know this because when Esav got married, when Esav was born, Yitzchak was 60 years old, and Esav got married to replicate his brother at 40. Ulefia perish hasheni. And if you look at the second explanation, that this happened because of the tears of the angels. This was even earlier. He was only 37. So the question arises, so you see what the Rebbe is saying? If you're going to say that his eyesight was weakened and that this was precipitated by events that happened much earlier in his life, why does the Torah precede mention of his dimmed eyesight by the words ki zaken Yitzchak? The Yitzchak got older. In accordance with the first two perushim, the pasuk should have been written in a different order. In consonance with how these events happened. First, we should have been told that his eyesight was compromised, and then that he got older. But that's not the way the pasuk appears. And therefore, Rashi cites the third parish, that this happened in order that Yaakov should get the blessings. And when in accordance with this third explanation, it jibes the order of the pasuk computes perfectly. It was when Yitzchak got older. And therefore he wants to put his affairs in order. And so he seeks to bless Esav. Only then did Hashem cause his eyesight to dim. In order that Yaakov should get the brachas. Now the Rebbe finishes with a Hira'ah, Zayin. This might be an all-time record in our learning. Achas ha'hirois min ha'perish hashlishi shel Rashi. One of the lessons of the third explanation of Rashi is ad kama yesh lehizoher ulehisrachik midibure lashon hara. How careful we have to be, how much we have to distance ourselves from lashon hara. L'chayra, it would seem, Haisel Kadosh Baruch Hu derech pshuta b'yoser lahavi lekach sheYaakov yikabel az habrachos. David could have found a more simple, more elegant way that Yaakov should get the brachos. Legalois li Yitzchak she'esav hinoi rasha, simply to reveal to Yitzchak the truth about Esav, that he was a rasha. Omemele yitin as a brachos to Yaakov, and then he'll understand that he has to give the brachos to Yaakov. It's not like Yitzchak was oblivious. He knew that, because Rashi tells us, and the Pasuk tells us that they were a source of bitterness and consternation. He knew that the servant of desire. But Yitzchak reckoned that this was not Esav's fault. He doesn't have the ability to influence them in the right direction. And even regarding Yitzchak himself, the Rebbe says, Esav knew that there are some aspects in Esav's personality that need refinement, let's just say. For instance, as soon as Yaakov, who was then masquerading as Yitzchak, mentions God's name, immediately Yitzchak knows something's up. Why? Because he knows that Esav's not in the habit of saying Hashem, of attributing things to Hashem and saying Hashem's name all the time. V'im Cain. So if Yitzchak is not completely blind to the reality, because we see that Yitzchak already had a certain doubt, a suspicion concerning Esav. So why doesn't Hashem just reveal the entire truth in its entirety? She'esav hinei rasha. The Esav is a rasha. The azay lehaya kol tzara b'kach shebetachiyena einei Yitzchak. And then there would be no need for Yitzchak's eyes to be dimmed. Ela shemikan royim manu. But from this we see ad kamba yesh lehisrachik ulehishamer midibor lashon hara. How much we have to distance ourselves, and we have to be careful from speaking words lashon hara. The Meshach 57 shanim haya Yitzchak kaloi bevayis. For 57 years, Yitzchak was basically confined to his home. Ukimes, and as Rashi says, consider as if dead. Ubevat shelo ye'amar Yehudi ba'afilu hino Yisrael mumar lashon hara. Just not to say on a Jew, even a professed apostate, a heretic, not to say lashon hara. And Elisheva, I see the question. I'll address it in a moment. V'imkach heim hadvarim b'yachas la'esav. And if this is true regarding Esav, hari b'negei l'bnei Yisrael la'achar matan Torah la'achar she'amar Kadosh Baruch Hu l'chol ish Yisrael anochi Hashem Elokecha. How much more so this is true for every Jew after Matan Torah, when Hashem said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, and Chassidus explains, Hainu she'etzel kol Yehudi. This means that it is true for every Jew, Anochi Avaya, that me, God, Nasa Elokecha, I became your God, Koichacha v'chayuscha. I became your strength. I became your vivifying force. Al achas kama v'kama. We have to be careful not to say the lashon hara. So Elisheva, let me just open up the chat right now. I was just seeing what was flashing on the. Oh, sorry, I thought it was Elisheva, but it's Chani. Chani's asking, what about protecting him from the pain of seeing this evil in his son? Don't we see Hashem made a tzaddik pass away early for this reason? We do. We in fact do see this. And then there's also a klutz kasha that we could ask the other way. And that is, we just said that we don't make one person suffer for the other. So here it seems that Hashem doesn't want to say Lashon Hara about Esav, so Yitzchak suffers. But Chani's answer could answer the klutz kasha. It's also protecting Yitzchak at the same time. So all of the pieces of the puzzle have to be considered all at the same time. But what strikes me about this Hira is that very, very often the accusation is leveled against Chabad that we don't put enough emphasis on Lashon Hara. We might be the only group of women that don't gather every week to learn the halachas of Lashon Hara. And you could see that the Rebbe is telling us, I kind of rely on you to get this, because we don't need to belabor this point. If every single sikha is about Avas Yisrael and understanding the core of every yid and understanding the neshama and understanding, then this is muvan me'alav, it's self-understood. But if you didn't understand this already, let me just point out from this Rashi that here we're talking about Esav. We're talking about Esav, and the Eibusher doesn't want to talk Lashon Hara about it. So it's kind of a spectacular thing.
So if I could ask a question, the Hira I don't have any issue with. It's the two additional things that the Rebbe brings in Ice Bays and Ice Hay to say, how could Yitzchak suffer blindness when Hashem just finished blessing him? And also Hashem could find other ways. And I feel like neither of those are answered, meaning we for sure should learn about Lashon Hara and even from Esav, but how does it explain that the way Hashem needed to have this done was through pain and suffering of a tzaddik? Is it just like we don't know the answer, we will never know the answer, and that's it? It's kind of like what Sarah asked before, meaning, so the Rebbe made the question stronger, but then those two elements of he was just blessed by Hashem, and there are other ways that Hashem could have had arrangements that he shouldn't see, he shouldn't know who lived for what years. Like there's an Eibusher here, he could figure out other ways that not to speak Lashon Hara about Esav, and Yaakov and Yitzchak could see. So it's like he's punished. We don't get it, right?
Rebbe explains
we don't see it.
But that's exactly why the Rebbe says the Pirushim are in the exact order that they are.
Right.
Because we don't have an answer, because the question is so acute, so profound.
But also the idea that he was doing him a favor, it is answered in a certain sense, because he, even after the blessing, and he was blind for 57 years, but Hashem only did it to him so that he shouldn't suffer from the pain of seeing who Esav really was. So it was a blessing in disguise.
Okay.
I don't know.
Wait. Can we hold on for a second? Wait. We must hold on for a second and remind ourselves. The Rebbe is not treating in this sikha the whole story. Okay, there's Sfarim and Chassidus of why it had to be that the brachas had to come in this way, and so on and so forth. The Rebbe is simply treating this Rashi. So we must remember that, okay? He's not treating all the questions on the Maisa itself, because these are deep in Yanim and Chassidus, right. What Yitzchak wanted to accomplish here, and what his blind spot really was, and why Rivka didn't suffer from this blind spot, and how the Alter Rebbe explains that the brachas had to come dafke through Yaakov Avinu, even though Yitzchak saw that Esav's Sherish Neshama was higher, v'chulei. So we could learn for months and months, and we won't exhaust all the questions. It's simply to explain why there are three Perushim in this Rashi and the order in which they are presented. And when we remember that, it allows us to kind of breathe.
But I have a struggle with the outcome of this sikha, because if this lashon hara has to be something different, because if we're talking about lashon hara, how much would we know if the Eibusha didn't tell us that? David and Bathsheba, Miriam was Aaron and Moshe Rabbeinu. That's it. It's really lashon hara al pi halacha, and we have to remember it every day. I mean, if the Eibusha is the Rebbe said that the Eibusha was minimizing, was that we should learn that the Eibusha did not want to speak lashon hara. What is this lashon hara that the Rebbe is talking about? Because when you look at all the stories, if not all, but so many of the stories in the Torah, it could fall under the category of lashon hara, one would think, because we would never have known this story if the Eibusha didn't tell it to us.
But
So
Esther,
what exactly is this lashon hara that the Rebbe is talking about? That
Esther,
the Eibusha didn't want to say. That the Eibusha didn't want to say.
the encyclopedia will still be written of the many, 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 many instances where the Rebbe takes every story in the Torah that looks like it's written bignusa shel somebody and turns it around to show us that it was written only to underscore the greatness. And the Rebbe says over and over that Rashi teaches us that the Torah doesn't even want to talk bignusa of a treifa animal. And so therefore, when the Torah tells us something that seems to be not so it's to teach us some. Look at the whole sikh of Miriam Bas Bilga. I mean, we'll just take one example, but I'm telling you, an encyclopedia will be written of what the Rebbe did here on Mapecha.
So maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's the answer, that this is pure lashon hara. Maybe that's the answer.
Rivky wrote in the chat. Rivky, you want to explain what it says in because Torah studies is based on the Rebbe Sicha. So explain.
Okay, so first of all, today's Monday, so I just looked at it yesterday very briefly, but there was, I remember the mention, and I just read the beginning, but it was a mention about that the level of Yitzchak was so high that he wouldn't have, it was for his benefit not to hear the lashon hara. Lashon hara that I remember personally being at a sikha at that Farbrengen, and the Rebbe was saying lashon hara is miskabel. I heard my mother repeating to me that she heard at the Farbrengen. You get mixed up, but basically the força, the strength of lashon hara, that even, you know what I'm saying, if you like, it's like the bribery that's put into a pocket that you don't even know, the judge's pocket, he doesn't even know it's there, but you're still bribed. So the whole idea of lashon hara is so strong. So it goes into that, but it also goes very much into the whole idea of the level of Yitzchak was so high that to hear from the Eibush Gnus, it goes into it. I personally didn't go into it. If somebody wants to look into it, I could run and bring it and I could paste it on. I could paste it onto the copy paste onto the chat, but I did ask a question. Maybe it's a klotz kasha. My mind is not working so well this morning, but 57 years. Did it have to be 57 years? Why not the last 10 years? It wouldn't have helped. My brain is, I'm thinking, why did it have to be according to what we were saying, in order for Hashem not to say lashon hara and for him to give this the brachas? Why did it have to be 57 years, Rivky? Why couldn't it have been less?
He thought he was dying.
If
He was within 5 years of his mother's years. He was 123. His mother passed at 127.
Oh,
He was
okay.
within 5 years of his mother. He doesn't know when he's going to go, so he has to get his things together. He has to get his life together.
The thing is, a person has bechir, but Hashem knows. So Hashem knew that it wouldn't be for another 57 years that he would be giving the bracha. So
you're asking, but
why for 57 years was the cause of the blindness if it was Esh 57 years later? But it could be it's a klotz kasha. I have like a little bit of a mishmash right now thinking.
it's not a klutz.
There's nothing to do with the chika.
I think it has to do with if Rashi tells us that this happened at Akeda, then that's when it happened.
No, I'm continuing with the whole third reason. in order not to say Lashon Hara. If it's in order not to say Lashon Hara, and the Lashon Hara would have been said 57 years later.
If that was the only reason, then he could have gotten blind a minute before. But it's not the only reason.
Okay, so it's complicated.
Exactly.
Didn't get blind. He got blind at 123. The 57 years is from 123. And he needed to get blind then, because that was when he was going to give the brachas.
No,
Hashem couldn't wait until he was 150 years old or whatever. He couldn't do that. It would have been too late. The brachas were given when he was 123.
they were.
Of course.
It's just technically when it happened right before he gave the bracha, so he lived longer.
Yeah,
You're saying,
when
why
when
didn't-
he
Okay, so
5
that's what I
years
thought. I
before
thought I had a
your
mishmash there. Okay, thank you,
Yeah.
thank you for
Thank you,
clarifying.
Elisheva.
I think Rivky, I don't know, and the Lashon Hara is a little bit, but for me, it's a huge takeaway, how careful one has to be what we say to a parent about their child. Even if it's a Rasha Marusha, even if there is no choice, even there is no end, even if it was out of their hands, because this is the way the Eibishter made it, this is Tohu, and this is Tikkun, and this is the world the Eibishter wanted. We can go into so much chassidus. I think, for me, the takeaway is, we have to be so careful how you say something to a parent about their child. And in our time, that's something that is extremely, extremely relevant. I don't know the different time it wasn't, but I'm just saying in our time, it is extremely relevant. We have to be very careful. And if that was, for me, the lesson of the Sikha, it's enough, Diana.
Not just a parent and a child. I think it's,
That's true. That's true. But when we're talking to a parent of a child,
Let's say it's
Especially when you say that you think that you're going to tell the parent because the parent has to take care of the child. And I saw someone in the chat ask, how could it be? Like, how could Yitzchak help Esav if he doesn't know? And still Hashem didn't think that Yitzchak had to help Esav.
That was my question. Like,
Oh, I
what if
see that now.
Yitzchak wanted to take Esav to a therapist, for example, put him on medication, get him some help? So sometimes a parent needs to know what's going on with their child. I don't mean this as like a, totally deep question, just sort of saying maybe there's an aspect. Or maybe like you keep saying, this is just one angle.
Maybe he could have done
Yeah,
teshuva with Yitzchak's involvement.
Right,
you're
Right.
so right, Sippa, but principals and teachers are not the Eibishter. And you're right that I think as parents, notwithstanding the lesson that we're learning here, we would all appreciate being told of things we need to know about our children so we could remedy them. But the Eibishter, who's everybody's parent and everybody's doctor and everybody's therapist, and knew that in this case, the Asa was on exactly what he needed to be on already.
Maybe when they're 60 years old, it's too late for you to do anything,
No, that's not true. I think you're a parent always, even though I'm
Yeah,
nowhere
but
near.
the question is how much you could interfere at that point. Sometimes you have to just take back and accept what there is and just, not try to take them to a therapist anymore.
Or or maybe it was meant to be that Esav was the way he was, and Hashem, Hashem made it this way. We talk about Bechira Chavshis, but in some senses, we don't really have Bechira. So maybe Esav didn't really have Bechira Chavshis mamish. And so he was supposed to be the way he was. And Hashem didn't say, oh, Yitzchak is going to have an influence on him and change his ways, So maybe maybe.
Yeah,
Dina
but how can you say that if Dina could have
just said that.
married him?
I just said that Dina was supposed to marry him and bring him to tshuva,
And his
but it
whole
didn't
head
happen.
She
Like,
wasn't,
but
but
it
the
didn't
point is she
happen.
wasn't. The Eibishter, look,
Right.
Later it says that Yaakov says to Esav, why don't you go ahead, I'll catch up to you, right? And Yaakov is the meat of emes, and Rashi right away says there, at the end of time, Yaakov's going to catch up. V'hayu, v'alu Moshe and Bahartzia, Lahar Esav, at the end of time, we're going to catch up. It wasn't the time. And that circles back to Shifra's asking why Yitzchak had to become blind for so long. Maybe we just need to talk a little bit more about Yitzchak. Yitzchak was an Eila Tamima. Yitzchak lived in Gan Eden for 3 years. Yitzchak never left Eretz Yisrael. He was the only one of the Avos that had only one wife. He was in a different place. And that's why Rivka had to arrange all this, because she did not suffer from the blindness that Yitzchak did. Yitzchak lived in a time that was yet to come. And Rivka understood the dangers of that, and that it was still Golus. And in Golus, Yaakov Avinu could not be tethered to Esav in a way where he would not be able to have his physical needs met only through Esav. That was Yitzchak's vision, that he could make a partnership between them and so on and so forth. It's not that Yitzchak thought for a minute that he was going to give Esav the brachas that were going to be given, like the legacy brachas. We know that, because even after he knew that he gave the brachas that he thought should go to Esav, he gave them to Yaakov. Still, before Yaakov leaves, that's when he gives him the legacy brachas, right? So we know that Yitzchak was not out to lunch, and that he wasn't oblivious to who Esav was, but he saw in Esav tremendous kaiches, and he thought that he could create this alliance. And Rivka knew that would fail on many levels, and that was dangerous. And more than anything else, she saw the world as it is now, and Yitzchak lived, in Mashiach Satan. So why did Yitzchak have to be blind for so long? It's not why did he have to be blind. Maybe we have to understand it's a description of who he is. His physical blindness is a tip of the iceberg. Sorry.
The one thing that I'm not understanding is that the whole culmination of this is about sight, right? We're all talking about sight here. And then suddenly the takeaway is about hearing. It's about Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara has nothing to do with sight. It's all about hearing. So he's not deaf, he's blind. So why do we suddenly go from talking about blindness to talking about Lashon Hara? Unless maybe it's to show that the people around him, even though they did see all these terrible things that Esav was doing, did not talk about it.
I think seeing and hearing are both about perception.
Absolutely.
But we're talking about the same thing, whether you take in the information through what you see, or whether you're perceiving things about a situation or about somebody else through what you take in, through what you hear.
What I'm suggesting is are we learning something that the people of the time, although they did not have blindness and they did see this, and he did this for many, many, many years, 57 or plus years, maybe they did not say anything to him. Maybe Rivka, the immediate characters in this scene, plus all the other people there, somehow rose to a higher level and didn't say any Lashon Hara about Esav.
Very
That
interesting.
could also
point.
be.
Interesting.
Very, very, very.
That could also be, meaning, but I don't know if that's the actual Hira from the Rebbe. I think the Hira from the Rebbe actually was that Hashem didn't show him who Esav truly was. So that it shouldn't be in a, Lashon Hara is not, that it shouldn't be in a way of Lashon Hara. But that could also be that they didn't speak it.
I think
almost like
Lashon Hara, all 99% of Lashon Hara comes from seeing. It's what you see. It's the chitzonius. It's what you see that causes Lashon Hara. And when you take it apart and you rationalize it, and you are done lechavschos, which takes seichel, you have to judge for lechavschos takes rationalizing. I think all Lashon Hara, if not all, at least 99%, happens from what we see, and we take it at face value. A person that's blind.
He wasn't blind because he didn't see. He was blind that when he gives the brachas the wrong. Wait a second. He was blind, so he shouldn't see what Esav was doing, or when she gives the brachas, he gives it to the right. He wouldn't see that he's giving it to Yaakov and not to Esav.
Both.
They're not
The
mutually
blindness was for him to know that it wasn't, that he shouldn't see that it was Yaakov and not Esav. The blindness wasn't that he shouldn't see the bad things that Esav's doing. Esav was very good at
The Rebbe is
camouflaging
saying
it.
it is.
He
That's
didn't
one of
see it.
one of the
No.
reasons we learned here. One of the reasons that he was blind was that he shouldn't see the evil that Esav does, and he was blind. Therefore, he switched the brachas.
No.
But that's the whole lesson that the Rebbe is
No.
saying.
The Abisha doesn't want to tell him your son is a Russia and doesn't deserve it. That's, you know what, I wonder, this is a very interesting thing. I wonder if this is connected in any way to the Seder when we break the middle matzah. The middle matzah stands for Yitzchak and Gevurah.
Okay.
And Yitzchak is such a tzaddik, he can't see bad. Why are
Okay.
you breaking it?
Since when is Lashon Hara? Is this the only place that Lashon Hara is defined as knowledge about a person as opposed to sharing or transmitting? Meaning,
No,
isn't
it
Lashon
is
Hara
about sharing and transmitting. It's that Hashem didn't share or transmit to Yitzchak. Hashem didn't share it or transmit it. So
meaning when you observe a behavior that's negative and it's not, you don't
wouldn't
share or do anything about it, why is that in the same category as Lashon Hara, where it's evil speech? You're sharing something like
So it's-
withholding information. It just seems like a very broad, unusual category of Lashon Hara.
I think that I hear what you're saying, Miriam. I think it's saying that something negative, even if it's true, is still Lashon Hara. But I think that this Hara is implying that all the other things we see in the Torah that we think are saying terrible things about someone can't actually be what we think it is at face value. If this is how the Eibishter operates, then we have to understand those stories differently.
I think the whole story here is about restraint. And the other examples that were given, Lashon Hara was spoken. It's all about restraining yourself from doing. And who do we learn to restrain ourselves from? From Hashem, who showed tremendous restraint and teaches us that's what we have to learn to do. Even if it's true, even if you're dying to say it, even if you've been hurt, the person who's been hurt by it, just don't transmit it.
No, I think you're right, Chana, but earlier people were saying that there are stories in the Torah that Hashem told us that seem to be negative about people.
Right.
And if the Eibusha doesn't say Lashon Hara, then it's telling us something that's not negative.
True.
And nobody underscored that like the Rebbe did. We're so used to it that we don't realize how radical it is. What a radical rereading it is. There was nothing positive said about Dina until the Rebbe came along. Okay, it's clearly given us pause. We are all going to become such righteous women now. Anyway, we are already idea people and not, thing people or, people who spend time talking about other people, only sharing ideas. So
Can I say something like politically incorrect? Maybe I should stop.
did you shut the recording?
Yeah. I have to remember how to do that here.